राम है स्वनाम धन्य, राम धन्य नाम, राम को प्रणाम, राम नाम को प्रणाम। राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन। ओ मन रे कर तू, ओ मन रे कर तू राम भजन, राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन। सब में राम, राम में है सब, सब में राम, राम में है सब। तुलसी के प्रभु नानक के रब, तुलसी के प्रभु नानक के रब। राम रमैया घट घट वासी, राम रमैया घट घट वासी। सत्य कबीर वचन राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन। ओ मन रे कर तू, ओ मन रे कर तू राम भजन, राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन। राम नाम में पावत पावन, राम नाम में पावत पावन। रवि तेजोमय चंद्र सुधाधन, रवि तेजोमय चंद्र सुधाधन। राम भजन बिन ज्योति न जागे, राम भजन बिन ज्योति न जागे, जाए न जी की जरन, राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन। ओ मन रे कर तू, ओ मन रे कर तू, राम भजन, राम भजन कर मन, राम भजन कर मन।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. You just heard a devotional song in the melodious voice of Aditya. And it was about remembering the divine all the time, repeating its name, and the name here given was Ram. So keep singing the name of Ram all the time. And it's surprising and strange that the one who is all pervasive and resides everywhere is the one whom we have to remember to be aware of. And then in the song, there was also an imagery given of the one in all and all in one. The one divine in all of us, and all the rest of the creation, everything animate and inanimate. The one resides in everything that it has itself created. And also the image of all in one. That is, all that we see around us, including ourselves, resides within that. Because that, the one divine, is not defined and limited by all of us or all the creation. It transcends the creation. So in that sense, that forms also a sort of an envelope which contains everything, which contains all creation. This is the type of imagery that Ishavasya Upanishad also creates. It's called Ishavasya Upanishad because it talks about the Vasya. Vasya, can have two meanings. Vasya can mean an abode, and Vasya can also mean a dress. It can suggest both. And both are true. It is the abode, that is, all creation is the abode of the divine. And it is also a dress. The divine is a sort of a dress for all creation because it envelops all of us. So that is one in all in one. With that introduction, now we go to today's session, which is a sort of a theoretical practical session. That is, we'll be talking about how to teach physical practices. Of course, you are yet not ready in terms of the course to start teaching yoga, but then you're taken one step in this course, and it is in that sense that we have today's session. And we'll keep having similar sessions also in YES.03 and YES.04, which will follow later. So we'll see how to teach the physical practices of yoga, and also along with it, how not to teach them. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. The YES program is a part of the 150th birth anniversary celebrations of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. The basics of all teaching, including teaching yoga, are that the teacher should love her students, she should love teaching, she should know how to teach, and she should know the subject. And when it comes to the subject, the teacher should know more than what she has to teach. And these four basics are important in that order, which means loving the students is more important than loving teaching, and loving teaching is more important than knowing how to teach. And all these three are more important than knowing the subject. Doesn't mean that the subject is unimportant, but all the same, it's just to emphasize that knowing the subject itself is not enough. Loving the students, loving the very process of teaching, and knowing how to teach, all these are also important, in a way more important, because when it comes to the subject, somehow the teacher will try to learn what she has to teach, and quite a bit will come out from the students themselves, because in fact, as Sri Aurobindo has said, nothing can be taught, which means that the teacher really can't teach anything, particularly the subject. It is the students who have to be interested, motivated to learn, and then they will end up learning, which means that it is the student who learns rather than the teacher who teaches. And in that sense, nothing really can be taught. And therefore, the important thing is to motivate the students to learn. And in that, the love that the teacher has for her students, how much she loves the process of teaching, which means her enthusiasm and her sincerity, which will show while she is teaching, and knowing the art of teaching, which can sometimes be innate because some are born teachers, and the rest can be taught how to teach. So that all that is important, because if we are to depend only on born teachers, we'll not have enough of teachers. That is also true, because all those who are born teachers don't end up becoming teachers. And the result is that among the teachers who really teach, there are very few who are born teachers, but then those who are not, they can be made good teachers by teaching how to teach. And that is why we have all the teacher education courses, including that on teaching yoga. So these are the basics which apply to all teaching. Now, specifically for yoga, let's start with the space that should be available in the hall or the studio or in the open air, wherever you conduct the program. Roughly 40 square feet or 4 square meters per student. So say the yoga mat is 6 feet by 1.5 feet. So that would give us 9 square feet. But then you have to have quite a bit of space around behind the student, towards the feet of the students, and on the sides, so that when their arms spread out, the students who are next to each other don't touch each other. So we have to leave around 40 square feet or 4 square meters for each student wherever we conduct the class. The seating arrangement would depend partly on how much the students have already learned, and partly on what is the number of the students. This is not a very good picture, but you can make out roughly what it is trying to convey. T is the teacher, and the rest of the mats are for the students. And in the first one on your left-hand side is the arrangement which would suit if there is a large number of students. And you would see that the mats in the different rows are not really one exactly behind the other, but rather in that gap between the row in front. And that is deliberate, because that minimizes the chances of touching each other. And also, more importantly, the students in the back rows can also see the teacher quite well. If the number of students is less, then one can opt for some of the other arrangements which have been shown here. And the most friendly arrangement, which makes the teacher close to the students, is the one shown on the left-hand side below that, in which you find that they are more or less in a circle. And these are the two best arrangements, but of course one can have other alternatives. If it is conducted in a studio or a room or a hall, then the atmosphere can be improved, and that helps. It should be a place that is clean, aesthetically pleasing, have a few nice pictures on the walls, etc. Have some flowers there, some indoor plants, etc. And the whole atmosphere should be friendly and pious, since yoga is a spiritual discipline. So it helps to have the pictures of a god or a goddess or a guru, and some incense sticks, fragrance, So all that adds to anything that can stimulate the senses and give that feeling of a sacred place. So that is the atmosphere one should try to create where one teaches the physical practices of yoga. How to begin? Either one can begin with a mantra, or begin with telling the students to remove their watches, glasses, cell phones, keys, purses, etc., etc. Now, which can be an encumbrance to the movements. Now, what we start with will depend partly upon how much the students are already settled. If they're already settled, you could start with first telling them to remove their watches, etc., and then recite the mantra. If they're not settled in their seats yet, then, to tell them to remove the watches, etc., is a little out of place. Then, one can just announce that, please sit down, we'll start with reciting a mantra. So that acts a bit like, the hammer in the court, quiet. So, so that's how it works. And so it can start with either of these. And of course, these days, it has also become important to tell them to keep the phones in the silent mode or switch them off completely. The sequence in the session is, taking the major things, is a prayer, which could be the mantra, or in addition to that, some more prayers, and the warm-up, and then Surya Namaskar, the asanas, pranayamas, and a final relaxation in Shavasana, and then we end the session with a prayer. Now, the prayer at the beginning and the prayer at the end. Why is it important? It is important as a reminder that yoga is a spiritual discipline. It's not just a physical exercise. And therefore, what can be included in the prayer is this reminder that I'm doing these practices to be physically more fit, and I want to be physically and mentally fit so that this instrument, the body-mind complex that I have been given for fulfilling the purpose of life, for doing what is necessary for fulfilling the purpose of life, so that I can do that properly. Because it requires action, and all action requires the combination of this body and mind. And these practices, in fact, help both make the body more fit and make the mind more at peace, as well as more agile, make it easier to concentrate, etc. So all that is there, and that is why I'm doing these. Another way to remind ourselves about the spiritual aspect of yoga is that this body is a temple of the divine. We just heard in that devotional song, the one in all. So the one who resides in us should have a beautiful temple around it. And it is to improve the quality of that temple that we are doing these practices. So our body and mind forms that temple. Of course, these are all images that we have created, we humans have created because of our limited mind and because we tend to think in terms of the mind. Otherwise, it is the one that is all, and therefore to think in terms of a temple and a deity within is somewhat erroneous, because the temple and the deity are the same. The one is the temple and the one is also the deity within. But all the same, these images of seeing the one in all and then seeing all in one, these are the type of images that we have created, which help us grasping this type of a concept of the one having become the creation and also existing beyond the creation. It helps us in grasping this concept because it is so contrary to our ordinary everyday experience. And therefore, to bridge the gap, we have created all this imagery. But it does help, and anything which helps in moving closer to the truth is worthwhile. Exactly how to pray is something that can be left to the students. That's again important, because it should not be seen that the yoga teacher is misusing her position to try and influence the faith and belief of the students. So while the basic principles of prayer can be talked about, but exactly how to pray still can be left to the students, and therefore they can just pray silently. Of course, one can recite the mantras, but if there is any reservation about that, it can be all done silently. And if somebody has reservation about prayer itself, then again, it is not a must. But of course, one has to understand then on the path of yoga, if one does not believe in the divine and therefore praying to the divine, then one is entirely on one's own. The grace is available, the divine is available to everybody, even to the atheist. But then the receptivity of the one who does not believe is so low that that person may not be able to receive what is available. But at the same time, that is an individual choice. And therefore, there is a variety of yoga, which is actually called the variety in which God does not enter, Nashwarya yoga, the one in which God does not, Ishwar doesn't enter. So it is possible to have that yoga also, but all the same, the interesting thing is that even in the 20th century, or now we are in the 21st century, even in the 21st century, majority of the human beings, around 90% in some studies, believe in some sort of a higher power. After the prayer comes the warm-up. How exactly it should be done, again, can have a lot of variety and has scope for innovation. It can consist of movements of different parts of the body one by one so that all the joints get loosened, or it can take the form of stationary running, if it is a young group, or some more sort of dynamic movements which are suitable for young people and also are helpful if the person, say, is in depression. So to bring the person out of that depression, a little more vigorous movement is necessary. So vigorous movements can also form the warm-up. And of course, one can also have a dancing movement, dance synchronized with some music or with the music in the background. All this can be a warm-up. So there's really no hard and fast rule. And this dancing movements and other movements can be slow-paced in an elderly group and faster-paced in the young people. So all those variations are possible. How long should the warm-up be? Again, there is no hard and fast rule. Young people need more of a warm-up. Sorry, young people need less of a warm-up than the elderly, because the elderly may have morning stiffness or stiffness of the body more than the young people. So young people may not need much of a warm-up. It can be quite short. The elderly need a longer warm-up. Also, it depends on the time of the day. If it is being done early in the morning, if these practices are being done early in the morning, then one needs a longer warm-up because there may be some morning stiffness. If it is being done later in the day, by then the body has moved around anyway in everyday movements, all the work that the person has been doing, and therefore not much of a warm-up may be necessary. And how much, which joints to loosen, that will decide how much time we spend on the warm-up. Again, there's no hard and fast rule. As you saw in the class which was devoted to warm-up, you can spend 1 full hour just doing a warm-up. But then rarely is that much time available because you can't loosen the joints everywhere, including, say, the joints between in each of these joints also you loosen, and the wrist also you loosen, and the elbow also you loosen, and you loosen the shoulder. You know, all these, if you start loosening in that way, and then there are two variations, one which will only loosen them and one which will increase the strength of these joints, then one can easily spend full 1 hour. But then that much of time is rarely available. So what we do is settle down for a few movements, 3 times, 5 times, or something like that, at all the major joints of the body. And again, there can be an economy that one can economize on this. For example, if while the students are still sitting after the prayers, etc., one may omit the shoulder movements, and those movements of the shoulder can then be combined with some of the movements which are synchronized with breathing on standing up. That is, while inhale, take the arms out, and while exhale, bring them back. Inhale and take the arms in front like this or up like this. Now, in that also the shoulders are moving. So you don't have to do the shoulder movement like this while sitting down. So you economize on time. You combine these movements synchronized with breathing with the shoulder, loosening of the shoulders. In the same way, say when it comes to the ankles, one need not do it separately. Again, when the students are standing and you do ankle stretch breathing, it can be done. Further, one can also economize on time further by combining this movement in which you take the arms up like this while breathing in. That is the time one can also stand on one's toes. So that will stretch the ankles. So you're not really standing on the feet as a whole. While taking the arms up, you also stand up on your toes. And then while bringing down, you bring the arms down and also bring the heels down. So that can be done. So that way, by applying one's mind, one can go on economizing on the time and yet loosen all the joints. Then Surya Namaskar. Firstly, why is it necessary? It has two possible roles. One is as a bridge between the warm-up and the traditional asanas. The second role that it can play is as an exclusive practice or almost exclusive practice when the time is short, because it combines 12 postures and therefore gives a top to toe workout in a relatively short time. And therefore, if a young person who has to go for work has only 15-20 minutes available at the most for these practices, then for this young person, Surya Namaskar is an excellent choice. So the person can start with a very brief warm-up, do 10 or 12 rounds of Surya Namaskar, then relax in Shavasana for a few minutes, and the person is fit for the day. And it will hardly take 15 minutes to do that. So it can be also as an exclusive practice, apart from being a bridge between the warm-up and the traditional asanas. Sometimes there's an objection, and the objection is more to the name than to the practice. That why should we bow down in front of Surya? So the objection is more to the name rather than to the practice or the movements involved. One can call it by some other name. And one of the names I suggest is Dwadashasana. Dwadashino in Sanskrit means 12. So a posture, an asana which combines 12 postures. So Dwadashasana, you can call it. You don't have to call it Surya Namaskar. In any case, when you do it in a studio, you are neither not facing the sun and doing your Namaskar to the sun. Now, coming to the asanas, which will come after the Surya Namaskar. How many asanas? Again, there's no hard and fast rule, but generally, if you are going for a top to toe workout in different postures, standing, lying down on the back, sitting, lying down on the belly, if you combine all these, you'll come to 15 to 20 postures. A judicious combination of these postures is what is generally done. Then which ones? Depends on the capacity of the person and how much the person wants to challenge herself. So again, one can decide on the difficulty level depending upon these factors. But then while the difficult postures give the person a little kick, a feeling of, a feeling of vanity. Yes, I can do even these difficult postures. By themselves, they do not necessarily contribute more to fitness than the simpler postures. When it comes to improvement in your cardiorespiratory fitness, that is fitness of the heart and the lungs, the simpler ones can be just as effective as the more difficult ones, which may require difficult balancing or bending the body to an extreme degree. That neither helps the fitness, nor does it necessarily provide the type of flexibility which is required in day-to-day work. The necessary amount of flexibility can be achieved even through the simpler practices. Then the choice of the asanas is such that they give a top to toe workout, and the sequence, it should be a reasoned sequence. Now, the type of reasoning, one type of reasoning that can be used is, what is it that is suitable in terms of the importance of the asana and how we can save time saving, in the sense that if the students are in one particular posture, can there be something else that we can get out of the way before we shift them to another posture? For example, if they're doing Surya Namaskar, then making them lie down immediately after Surya Namaskar, and then once again coming to the standing postures means that they have to shift the posture once more. So one can finish with the standing postures after Surya Namaskar, and then they don't have to stand up again during the rest of the practice. That would save some time. However, there can be another type of logic which can be used, that after Surya Namaskar, they may be exhausted and therefore some relaxation in any case has to be given. So instead of giving the relaxation in the standing posture, why not give them total relaxation in the lying down posture in Shavasana, and then do the lying down postures, and we can take up the standing postures later on. Or if the time is really short, why not omit the standing postures altogether? Because say a posture like Tadasana has already been covered to some extent when you are doing the warm-up like this. So Tadasana is done. When it comes to an asana like the Kati Chakra asana, in which you are twisting the back, while standing can be compensated by Meru Vakrasana in the lying down posture. When you're lying down supine, again, you can twist the spine. So twisting the spine can be just done once instead of twice. Why do it in the standing position? So you can omit the standing postures altogether and give the relaxation which the person needs, because the person is exhausted in Surya Namaskar. That relaxation, instead of giving in the standing posture, you can give in the lying down posture. So, the teacher has to apply her mind. See what type of a group it is, how energetic it is, how much time is available. So all these things keeping in mind, the person can decide what to do, but then there have to be some basic principles followed in the sequence. And the most important of those principles is that every pose, at least every major pose, should be followed by a counter pose, so that the stretch in one posture is neutralized by the stretch in the posture that follows. And again, the postures which involves turning to the left and turning to the right, like say Trikonasana or Kati Chakrasana or Meru Vakrasana. In these asanas, we do not need a counter pose, because movement to the left is counterposed by when you turn to the right. Now, how should the teacher give the instructions? The teacher's voice should be loud, slow, clear, and sweet. All these are important. Loud enough to be heard, slow enough to be followed properly, spoken clearly so that it is followed. The students follow what you are saying, and then it should have a sweetness which will come if the teacher actually loves the students, so that sincerity will show in the sweetness of the voice. Now, how detailed should the instructions be? In the beginning, that is when the students have just joined, naturally the instructions will have to be in considerable detail. Then as they get practiced, the detail can go on becoming less. And finally, you might have to just name the posture. And there could also come a stage when the students don't even need the name, and they just know how to move from one posture to the next. And that can be done, say, by synchronizing with music. So when there's a new movement in the music, you just say next, and the students know which the next posture is. So the detail will depend upon how much practiced the students already are. A few tips about instructions. The style of the instructions should be like that of an interpreter. Now, say we have one of the regular students here is Siegfried. Now, he understands both Spanish and English, and I'm speaking in English. Suppose he wants to interpret my instructions to a group that understands only Spanish. Now, how will I speak? I'll speak one or two sentences, then stop for Siegfried to translate it into Spanish. And after he has finished the translation, then only I'll speak the next sentence. I'll not go on speaking a whole paragraph and then expect that he'll interpret it. I'll speak only one or two sentences at a time. And after he has interpreted, then I'll go further. Now here again, that's some sort of an interpretation of that type is taking place. Here it is not interpretation from one language to the other, but it is the translation of a verbal instruction into a bodily movement. So the spoken language is being converted into the language of the body, which means that if you had said that lift your right arm up, it's only words. Now the student has to translate it into actually taking the right arm up. Which means that the student is working like Siegfried, interpreting it in another language. So till the student has completed that movement, that is completed the interpretation in another language, the language of the body, I need not say what the person has to do after that. If I have to tell him that you bend to the left after that, that should come after the person has actually taken the arm up. So that is what it means, that your style has to be like that of an interpreter. So keep observing the students. After you said something, a small bit of the instruction, after the students have interpreted it in terms of the body, that is, they have completed that movement, then tell them what next to do, and so on. So that is one thing that we have to keep in mind. Further, we have to also understand the limitations of the instructions. Students do what they see rather than what they hear. For example, if you're facing the students and you tell them to take their right arm up, now your right arm is immediately opposite their left arm. And you see so many students, will actually, instead of taking the right arm up, they start taking the left arm up, because they're just seeing what you're doing and they want to do it on the same side as you are doing it. And for them, it is not the right side, but the left side. Now, that is quite okay. And therefore, one can even change the instructions accordingly. And instead of saying, take your right arm up, just tell them, take one of the arms up, because it makes no serious difference. And then when you have to do the other side, now tell them, take the other arm up. So one has to keep the limitations of the instructions in mind. So actually, they are translating your body movement, that language of your body, into the language of their body. You know, just as we find it easier to understand the same language which we know, rather than learn it, understand it through an interpreter, here also the students are doing exactly that. They are more at home with the language of your body than the language of your instructions, even when they understand the language that you're speaking. And then sometimes the person who is giving the instructions also needs a little clue not to make a mistake. For example, in a posture like Semeru Vakrasana. So if you have to sort of tell them, place the right heel on the left knee, take the right leg towards the left, take your head, turn your head so that you look at your right hand. Now, all this, you know, by practice, you may remember. But in the beginning, even for the instructor, it can be complex, and you can mix up right and left. So some visual clues sometimes the teacher can get by looking at a student who is quite good at the practices. She knows that this student doesn't make any mistakes. So when that student, after placing the right heel on the left knee, tries to take the right leg towards the left, you know, this is the left for this student, and she's taking it towards the left, whereas she's turning the head towards the right. So you know that gives a clue to the teacher also whether to say right or left. So you can keep getting these visual clues also from the students, and that avoids mistakes, particularly when it comes to right and left. What should the instructions include? Contraindications. Who are the students who should not do it? Now, this should come before you actually tell them how to do it. While it can be repeated after the practice has been done, there's no harm in repeating these things. But all the same, there's no point in talking about the contraindications, that is the situations in which that particular posture should not be done after you're going the instructions and the students have already done it. So first tell that the next posture that we are going to do should not be done by those who have this, and this type of conditions. So contraindications should come first, and then you can motivate them by giving a few benefits of the practice, and then start giving the instructions about how to do it. And then one can repeat towards the end of the practice or after the practice the precautions regarding contraindications, that is those who are the people who should not be doing it or should do it with some modification or in a limited way. For example, Kapalabhati, if a person has high blood pressure, you can do it, but not more than 20 strokes a minute. So don't do it very fast. So some of these precautions can be repeated at the end of the practice. And also some of the common errors can be pointed out while the students are doing it, and some can be talked about at the end of the practice. The teacher can deliberately demonstrate what type of errors were commonly made by the students, or are commonly made by some students, and show that this is how it should not be done and this is how it should be done. However, one thing which should be avoided is pointing out one particular student and saying that, see, this student is making this error, don't ever make this error. You know, while others may learn something from that error which one student is making, it can hurt that student who has actually made the error and make that student feel stand out as if I'm the only one who is making this mistake at those, make that student feel as if I'm in some way different from others, not as good as the others. So one should never point out any particular student to demonstrate an error. The teacher can do it herself or speak in general terms about the errors which some of the students in the class are making. Or realizing these common errors, she can give the instructions, include it in the instructions. For example, in Trikonasana, there may be a tendency to bend forwards. So while she's giving the instructions, she can also say, please don't bend forwards. Now, that's a general instruction. And those to whom it applies, those students will get it, that I'm the one who is bending forward. So that's why the teacher has said it. Or say in Nadi Shodhan Pranayam, there's a tendency for the neck to go down. So in between in the instructions, keep saying once in a while, keep your neck straight. So, that way you can point out the errors while giving the instructions also. Now, some of the things about instructions are rather some things which should not be done also, and that is don't overdo. Which means that the instructions should be precise, but detailed only up to a point. And particularly after the students have learned the practices. So as they go on learning, go on making the instructions less and less detailed. Otherwise, that creates only unnecessary noise in the class. The silence is much better than noise in a class on physical practices. So minimize the instructions to the minimum necessary, keeping in mind the capability of the class, how much they already know. Then one should also emphasize that these postures have to be done with full awareness. Not only how the body is moving, but that one should be fully aware of what is happening to the body, where I'm feeling the stretch, and so on. And how much stretch is good for me. If I go beyond this, then I might injure myself. So instead of going beyond the point where I might injure myself, I step back a little and then hold the posture there. Now, all this is possible only if one does it with full awareness. And the whole session should be enjoyable, not a burden to be carried. This is a sort of common feeling sometimes which we get, because sometimes in schools, the punishment given is go and run around the playfield 5 times. So a person grows up with the idea that any type of exercise is a sort of a punishment. But exercise can be enjoyable. And now we have biochemical evidence in its favor. It releases endorphins in the brain. Endorphins, are the feel-good hormones, feel-good neurotransmitters in the brain. They make us feel better. So exercise can be an enjoyable experience, and yogic postures even more than the other types of physical activity for various reasons which one can understand. The atmosphere in which it is done, the relaxing nature of the practices, the soothing voice of the atmosphere of the instructor, etc., all that can make it an enjoyable experience. And just because something is serious and important doesn't mean that it also has to be boring or it has to be like a punishment. So make it an enjoyable experience. And the endorphins, which I was talking about, they not only make us feel good, they also make us feel addicted. So if you truly make it an enjoyable experience, the person can get so addicted to the practices that the day the person is not able to do it, she will feel that something is missing because of the addiction. And this is one addiction which is not only permissible, but also desirable. And then alignment. Now, alignment is generally interpreted that different parts of the body should be well aligned while doing the postures. That, of course, is true. But here the alignment is not only of different parts of the body, but also of the body with the mind and of the mind with the soul. Which means that if we do the postures with full awareness, it is possible to feel the presence of all parts of the being through the body. So the body can become that doorway through which the other parts of the being, including the soul, can be felt. And therefore, when we do the postures with full awareness, the idea is not just to avoid accidents or avoid injury, but also because that is the type of bodily silence in spite of the posture. When you are in the posture, holding the posture, the body is in a state of silence. That bodily rest, that bodily silence, that bodily absence of restlessness in the body. Now, all that can help in aligning the body to the deeper parts of the being, including the soul. So that is the type of alignment that is possible in the yogic postures. And all that the teacher can facilitate through the way she gives the instructions. And of course, one should not be in a hurry to do all these things, alignment with the deepest parts of the being and all that, because it can take time. So again, keeping in view how much the students have already learned and whether they're ready for that sort of alignment, one can start with only the full awareness of the body itself while the body is moving, and then from there take them towards the awareness of the other parts of the being during the movements, particularly while holding the posture. Then some of the important points which apply in general to all the physical practices can be exemplified by a particular practice which shows it particularly well. For example, Trikonasana is a good practice for demonstrating or emphasizing that the practice should be done with full awareness. Why? Because you're taking the arm up very slowly, and therefore there's time for being fully aware. And so, you're taking the arm up slowly, not in a jerk. And then, turning the hand slowly. When you reach the horizontal, you're turning the hand slowly like a dancer. And then when you reach up, you are up but not fully stretched. So then you give yourself a gentle, slow stretch. Something like, you can pull a rubber band like this, or you can pull it like this. So the yogic postures, you pull it like this. So you reach here and then give a gentle stretch. So now doing with full awareness is possible only if you are that slow and that gentle in the movement. Now that can be very well demonstrated in Trikonasana when you're taking the arm up. And then, of course, this effect should spill over to the other practices. But some asanas are particularly useful for exemplifying a particular point which applies to these practices in general. Then, every pose should be followed by a counter pose. That can be exemplified very easily by the combination of Setubandhasana and Pavan Muktasana, because anybody can feel at once that, yes, this movement is in exactly the opposite direction. Then, one of the important points is that one should not just be able to get into the posture, but also how one comes out of the posture is also important. And that can be very well demonstrated in Pavan Muktasana, because if you don't give any instructions, then the student, particularly in the beginning and when the student is just itching to come out of the posture, she may just sort of quickly stretch the legs and bring them down with a thud on the mat. Now, how to bring it out slowly and gently without lifting the head? Now, in Pavan Muktasana, the head has been raised, but then the head has been brought down and the legs have been taken up. And then keeping the head down without lifting the head, the legs are being brought down slowly. Now, that is something which it can be exemplified best in Pavan Muktasana. So the teacher can, apply the mind and see that these are all the general principles that I have to bring out. But then instead of giving a lecture on all these general principles first, why not exemplify them through these practices? Saves time, makes it more interesting, and anything can be understood much better when you fit it into a real practice rather than talk about it in general. Now, apart from the instructions in the class, there are other things, giving a demo of the practice and correcting the errors. So we'll talk a little bit about these other things now. In the demonstration, should the teacher do it or should she have an assistant? Ideally, she can have two assistants. Teacher can just give the instructions. One teacher can give the demo and another teacher can go around the class correcting the errors. But then it can be done by one teacher also. And in some cases, it is actually important to give the demo first and then the instructions while the students are doing the practice, and give the demo once more while the students are practicing it. For example, if it is lying down postures, the students can't see the demo if they are doing it themselves. So it's better to tell them to keep sitting, watch first, give the demo, and then don't have to give the instructions at that time, because they are seeing the movement, which is more important than the way you'll give the instructions. And then if the instructions are given along with the demo, then they can have a look at the demo and they'll make out quickly, because the real demo has already been given, and then the instructions become more intelligible and they can practice. So, these are all things which will depend upon whether it's a standing posture or a lying down posture, and also how many teachers are actually available. But then one thing the teacher should certainly avoid doing is, in some postures, combining the instructions with the demo, because then the teacher might twist her neck, because she may try to face the students in a posture where she cannot really turn the neck, and she's also trying to do the posture. So she should not keep that in mind, that she doesn't twist her neck or injure herself in the process of trying to combine the demo with the instructions. So there's no hard and fast rule about the extent to which the instructions, the demo, and the students actually doing it can be split into different steps or clubbed. So one can apply one's mind and see what is it that is most feasible in this situation, depending upon whether it's a lying down posture or some other posture, and also how many teachers are available to do it. Now, correction can be done by the teacher herself if she's alone, or it can be done by an assistant teacher who goes around. It may appear ideal to have too many teachers, but that doesn't necessarily make it better teaching. One teacher who is dedicated to the students can also do a fairly good job unless the group is extremely big. In a very large group, one might need an assistant, but otherwise an assistant is not absolutely necessary. That doesn't necessarily make it better. But then assistant teachers are also there because that is how they become teachers. They learn how to teach. So it's a learning experience for the assistant teacher also. So for various reasons, generally we end up having assistants. And sometimes if you have a class in which different students are at different levels, some have been there much longer than the others, then one of the students herself becomes an assistant teacher, at least for giving the demo. Then, correction of errors. Suppose the teacher has actually gone near the student and telling that student which error she has made and how to correct it. That can be done orally in some cases, but in some cases, actually touching may be necessary. And how to touch can be something which will depend a lot upon the rapport between the teacher and the students and the culture, in prevailing culture and so on. And the maximum difficulty arises when it is a male teacher and he's trying to correct the posture of a lady. So that is the situation in which the touch has to be more carefully calculated. And one of the safer things is if the teacher happens to be a lady, then there are less problems, or if it is an old man like me, because most cultures, an old man's touch is considered asexual. And therefore, depending on the situation, one can decide on how much to touch. But the important thing is the sincerity that of the teacher. The touch is meant for the correction of the error and not to derive any sexual pleasure. Now, that is the sincerity which the teacher has, and that sincerity comes through the teacher knows it best, how sincere he is, and the person who knows it the next best is the person whom he is touching. It somehow gets communicated. Now, here is an example of an American whom we had as a guest teacher for a few days. He was visiting the ashram for the batch that was doing the teaching yoga course in 2017. This teacher is an American teacher, Justin, and he was trying to demonstrate how to touch a student. And what he said was, you first go close to the student, sit next to him and ask him, may I touch you? So you get the student's permission, and then touch very gently the way he is touching his feet, maybe trying to tell him the Shavasana, keep the feet a little further apart or something. Maybe he's trying to tell something like that. Then touch the student gently. And after you've finished correcting by touching, thank the student for allowing the teacher to touch him or her. So now this is the type of culture the US has evolved today. So different places have different types of cultures which evolve, but in general, yes, the touch does have a significance. Sometimes it is necessary, and how to do it needs some degree of thought. Then relaxation between asanas. We generally have relaxation interspersed between the different postures. Can that time be also used for something else? Yes, that can also be used for making some important points which could not be covered while giving the instructions. The students are relaxing, but you can keep talking about some important things which can be brought out. One can do it also for introducing the next practice. If they are, say, particularly relaxing in the standing or sitting posture, then whatever next we'll be doing for that, the instructions of the demo can be given while the students are relaxing. One can also talk about the benefits and other things of the postures. while the students are relaxing. And one can also answer some questions which might have been raised by the students during the relaxation period. Now, after every Shavasana, even if there's nothing else to tell, we have to allow time for what? We have to allow time for the transition from the extreme relaxation and peace that the person felt in the body and the mind, the transition from that to routine activity. That transition should not be sudden. And so even if there's nothing else to tell, the transition from Shavasana to returning to ordinary consciousness and ordinary everyday movements should take a little time. And that is why we don't come out of Shavasana immediately and just jump up. Now, we'll come to this again when we come to the Shavasana at the end of the session, which will require this even more, this attention to the transition. But let's now assume that the asanas are over and now we are taking the students towards the pranayamas. Now, while doing that, again, may require some relaxation as we move from asanas to the pranayamas. But then that time can be minimized, the time given to that relaxation, if you interpose the eye exercises during that period. Because for all practical purposes, the student is at rest while doing the eye exercises, and yet you are able to do one of the important practices at that time. For example, if the last posture done, for example, was Dhanurasana. Now from Dhanurasana, the student came to Makarasana, and from Makarasana, you made the student sit up without giving enough time in Makarasana. You know that you're not given too much time in Makarasana for relaxation, which was required after Dhanurasana. You made the student sit up all right, but then you don't take the student to the pranayamas. You make the students do the eye exercises, because then that is a continuation of the relaxation that the student had in Makarasana. Still, you're not doing anything strenuous, like say full yogic breathing. So before going to full yogic breathing, do the eye exercises. Look left and right without moving the head, up and down, diagonal movements, rotational movements, and between all these sets of movements, relaxation of the eyes. Then, maintaining group awareness. In some practices where a sound is made, that becomes important, and probably one of the commonest in which the sound is made is Brahmari. In which while breathing out, the person makes a sound like that of a female honeybee. That sound, Brahmari. Now, if you leave the students a little loose during that practice, everybody's, capacity for the duration for which the person hums is different. And therefore, if the students are just left to do the practice on their own, do 5 rounds of Brahmari, very soon you will have a hum all the time, going on all the time in the class. Instead of that, it is better to create a certain type of group awareness so that everybody is humming at the same time and is silent at the same time. And yet there is scope for that variation that exists between different students. Some will hum longer than the others. For that, one of the tricks that can be employed is that when you find that if it's a large class, you'll notice that they all started it together when you said that inhale, take a deep breath in. So most of them complete the deep breath in at the same time and start humming at the same time while breathing out. But then after some time, you'll find that the intensity of that hum starts dropping, which means that some students can't hum anymore, whereas others are still continuing. Now, those who can't hum anymore, they have to be prevented from taking a deep breath prematurely so that then they'll be out of phase with the class. So how can you prevent them from taking a breath in and starting their next round while others are still humming? The teacher can say a few things at that time. Then they'll start listening to the teacher instead of going to the next breath. So when you find that the intensity of the hum has started coming down, say if it's the first round, then you can remind them, feel a soothing resonance during the hum. So, that those who have finished, they are listening that, oh, this time I didn't pay enough attention to the soothing resonance. Next time I'll do it. So the student has not started the second round yet. So the second round starts more or less together again, for which when you find that the hum has almost completely stopped, then you say inhale for the second round. When they finish the second round, then you say something else. Then suppose you can just say, that's very good, beautiful. Now that itself can be something. So again, those who had finished the hum earlier, they are enjoying your compliments that they did a beautiful job instead of starting the next round. Second round is over. Now, third round, when the third round, again, the hum is coming down, you can tell them last 2 rounds. Now they're now feeling that now there are only 2 rounds left. So some of them are just listening to this. They're not actually humming. Now, when the last round actually comes, you can say, last round, take a real deep breath in. Now, they know that, once again, that a reminder that the breath has to be deep. That's a reminder for everybody. And those whose hum has stopped, they're just listening. They're not starting. So that way, you can maintain group awareness and you'd find really works. In spite of a large group, in spite of their humming time being different, they all start humming together. And you really have silence between 2 rounds of Bhramari. Okay. Then the end of the session. Ideally, it should be in Shavasana, because nothing gives as much relaxation as Shavasana does. How much the duration of this Shavasana will depend upon how much time is available. It can vary anything from 2 to 3 minutes to 20 minutes. But suppose there is not even 2 minutes available for Shavasana. Then what do? Then we keep it in mind then that the last pranayama is a truly relaxing pranayama like Bhramari. And after that, we spend a little longer time on prayers and mantras, etc., in the sitting posture before ending the session. So that can again make it relaxing. That can be a compromise that can be made if there's no time for lying down and doing a real Shavasana for 2 to 3 minutes. Then how to get up from Shavasana? Again, there is a proper procedure in which you turn to one side, taking the one arm up, another arm on the abdomen, and then taking the support of both the hands and sitting up. There is a proper procedure for doing it. But then young people find that quite redundant. They may just be able to sit up. And therefore, that is okay for young, energetic people. They can get up. But then everything has to be slow, not jerky. And what they should do after they have got up, that we'll come to in a moment. But suppose a student doesn't get up. You have given instructions for getting up, but some students have fallen asleep. Then what to do? Sometimes you can just leave the student, and after a while, the student will realize this commotion around because others are getting up and will get up. But suppose the student continues to sleep and you do want to wake up the student, then the gentlest way to wake up the student is what I learned as a medical student. That's the way the nurses are taught, particularly the nurses, when they have to wake up a sleeping patient. Of course, not to give him a sleeping pill. They should never do that. But the nurses are taught that if they have to wake up a sleeping student, touch the ear gently. Or touch the ear a little inside like this. So a gentle touch on the ear wakes up the person, not with a jerk, but gently. So that is the best way to wake up a sleeping person. Now, what do we do at the very end after the Shavasana is over? Try to remember in the instructions that as the students are getting up, tell them to keep the eyes closed. At least this is the way I do. There are other variations. In some cases, they open the eyes and then they're given the instructions to close the eyes. But when they can keep the eyes closed while getting up and sit up with the eyes closed, then one can chant the ending mantras and then tell them to rub their palms, cup the palms, and place the cupped palms in front of the eyes without actually touching the eyes. Now, all these are not just rituals to be gone through. One has to also allow time for them. For example, rubbing the palms can be just a ritual, but it can take a little longer, particularly in winters. And then placing the cupped palms in front of the eyes, again, has to have some time for the eyes to actually feel relaxed. So give time for that relaxation of the eyes before telling them to bring the hands down along the body, and then open the eyes with a few blinks. And then one of the things which many teachers do is tell them to look around, look at the student sitting next to you, and then say an affectionate namaskar to all of them. And then in the end, the teacher says a namaste to all of them. And one of the rhyming ways to do it in Hindi is namaste, sada raho haste, chalo yog ke raste. Namaste, sada raho haste, keep laughing, always, always keep laughing, be happy. It means namaste, sada raho haste, chalo yog ke raste, walk the path of yoga. So that is a rhyme with which the teacher can end, and that invariably brings a beautiful smile on every student's face. And then they can get up. So you could, this is sort of this rather elaborate procedure after getting up from Shavasana is to allow for the time which is necessary for that transition from that extreme peace and all bodily peace, mental peace, all types of peace that the student had during Shavasana, to make a transition from that extreme degree of peace to ordinary everyday activity. Now, we've talked about several rules, what should be done, what should not be done, but all rules have exceptions. However, there's one rule which has no exception. What is that rule? The rule that all rules have exceptions has no exception. Okay. So, therefore, more important than any rules which we have talked about are a few other things. Apart from the things which we talked in the beginning, that the teacher should love her students, she should love teaching, she should know how to teach, and to some extent, she should also know the subject that she has to teach. So those are more important than any rules. And besides that, more important than any rules are that if you have the same group for 5 to 6 days, at the end of it, leave them with a set of practices which they can do on their own later on. And for that, one can follow a graded approach, do only the simpler practices on the first day, a little more elaborate, add 2 or 3 difficult ones on the second day, another 2 or 3 difficult ones on the third day. By the fourth day, you have done everything that you wanted to do, more or less, and then you can keep repeating the same thing on the 4th, 5th, and 6th day. So something like that. And we have videos on that also available in the class recordings of Yes.01, which are there on the Yes channel, YouTube channel of Yes, the Yes courses, Yes.01 class recordings. So you'll see there's a graded approach that has been followed. And you can fit all these different days in a 1 hour slot, if there's a slot. How you can do it is, because on the first day, the practices you do are fewer, but then the instructions required are more elaborate. On the second day, you can add 2 or 3 practices for which the instructions will be elaborate. But for the practices which you are repeating for the second time, the instructions can be made less elaborate, they can be brief. So as you go on increasing the number of practices, but the instructions also keep getting shorter. And therefore, you are not only able to fit all the practices after the 4th or 5th day within the 1 hour slot, you sometimes start getting a little more time also for the ending Shavasana. So much so that by the 6th day, you may be able to do all the major practices and still have 15 minutes left for the Shavasana at the end. And to be able to leave the students with a clear-cut set of practices which can do on their own, it is important not to talk too much about variations of different postures every day. Because if you talk of too many variations, except those which are necessary, say, for example, to make it easier for, say, some senior citizen. But otherwise, don't talk too much of variations which only leave them confused. Teach them one standard way of doing it in which all of them can do it. With some exceptions, you might teach a little easier practice, but not all the variations that are possible. Which means that you don't have to try to impress them by showing them how many practices you know or how difficult postures you can do. We are teaching to impart knowledge, not to impress the students. Again, more important than any rules is that learning should be fun and should be an enjoyable session, relaxing session. That is what any teaching session should be, particularly a session on yogic practices. And at the end, the student should become a self-motivated self-learner and improve the innate awareness of different parts of the being while doing the physical practices, and should feel inspired to become a better person. This is a picture postcard view of Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch from where I'm speaking and where I work. And here I may make an appeal These CS courses are completely free, but they do cost something. And therefore, if any of you voluntarily wants to make a donation, it would be welcome. And for that, you can send us an email, and we'll send you the details of the bank account of the ashram, to which you can transfer any amount that you like. Even small donations are most welcome. And of course, not just for offering a donation, even otherwise, you are free to write to us anytime at yes@yesspirituality.com. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. Thank you all.
May I ask a question? I'm Veena Hora. I've been conducting yoga sessions, and in my sessions, I ask the students to face either east or north direction while doing yoga. That is what I learned, that the cosmic energy flows in that direction. So I would like you to enlighten me on that.
Yes, I'm aware of that type of injunctions, and they may have a value, but we try to keep things as rational as possible, unless we see a significance in also talking about things which may not be so rational. And that's why generally I don't emphasize those things. It's not in keeping with the spirit of our tradition, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. I've never emphasized that sort of things, but all the same, if one wants to do it, there's no harm in doing it if it is appreciated by the students. Because when it comes to cosmic energy, again, these are universal things, and they don't necessarily have to be confined to certain directions. With the right awareness, one can make even bring about changes even in the way the energy may flow. There are stories about Sri Aurobindo being in a room where there was a storm blowing outside, heavy rain, and water was entering through all the windows, but no, not a drop of water entered his room, so that he could continue his concentration or work, reading, writing, whatever he was doing, completely uninterrupted. So cosmic forces are also subject to human control, just question of awareness. So we really don't have to take this sort of injunction so seriously that we make a strict rule out of it. But we have no objection either to following any such practice or giving those instructions.
Thank you so much. And another thing I would just like to share, that towards the end of the session, I asked the students, and including me also, we express gratitude to the divine power. And also I tell them to do some auto-suggestion that I'm happy, feel happy, I'm healthy, feel healthy, and I'm peaceful and feel the peace within. And we end the session like this. So hope it's okay to do this.
Oh yes, perfect. Because the auto-suggestion is also a part of a longer Shavasana. It can be done in Shavasana itself, auto-suggestion, which you're talking about. And gratitude, of course, as a part of the ending prayers, not only mantras, one can also say prayers. And gratitude is one of the best and, in a way, complete prayers.
Thank you so much. Though I've been practicing yoga for very, very long and conducting sessions, but let me tell you very sincerely that I've learned a lot during sessions. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to ask the question? There's one question in the chat box. What about to open the eyes before to discover or remove the palms from the face? The experience of open the eyes in the dark is a profound feeling and meaningful from my opinion.
I think it's not just your opinion, also your experience. And that is a learning for me. I have not tried it, but I'll try it. I'm sure if one opens the eyes before removing the palms, just as it gives you a very peaceful experience, it would perhaps do it to others as well. Thank you for sharing it with all of us.
Are there any more questions? Anybody would like to type in the chat box or unmute and ask? All right, in that case, if we don't have any more questions, we can close today's session. Tomorrow we will have our last class. It will be more of a question answer discussion and feedback class. So if you're not able to think of any question right now, you have many hours before we come together tomorrow to kind of bring your questions and see whatever you have gone through in this module. And if there are any doubts, any suggestions or any questions, so please bring it to the class tomorrow. And thank you, everyone. As usual, we end with the music and see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Om